Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. But now that you're here, stay for a minute and hear me out. This is the first longer form video that I attempted to edit and put together of one of my projects, and even after speeding it up, it's just about an hour long. So instead of putting some random beat or some music in the background for an hour, I figured I'd do something different. I'm going to read a book. I don't expect anyone to sit through this. If you don't want to sit through this, just keep scrolling. But I'm sure there's at least one crazy person out here who will. I'll be reading Hank Nebula by a friend of mine, Josh York. I'll tag him below. With that said, sit back, relax, and come on a journey with me while I struggle at life for an hour. Chapter 1. The dry desert air had a habit of cooking everything that decided to stick around for too long. Above, the blazing orange sky was peppered with glowing clouds that only helped to weave the sun rays into a dreamlike aura. Hank Nebula's footsteps in the sand carried across the dead air of the planet. He came to the crest of the hill and stopped. A small local pin lizard burrowed into the sand at his feet. Crag Station lay nestled in the valley below, a small outpost comprised of only 4 buildings: the Harvest Tower, barracks, office, and, of course, the saloon. Hank placed his hand on his hat and fluffed it on his head to brush his hair out of his face. With a long sigh, he started the short walk down the hill into the station. The border of the station was outfitted with 4 sensors, one in each corner. They formed a square perimeter that alerted the office of anyone entering or leaving. A simple way of keeping up with everyone when you know just who's there. Hank walked past the sensor and watched it out of the corner of his eye flash red at his movement. The heat was somehow worse between the buildings. The complete lack of any airflow caused it to permeate from the sands under his feet. His thick brown boots were made of high-end tar leather, best you could get on Mantis 3, if you had the guts to hunt the bull tar, that is, which Hank took pride in doing more than once. A short walk to the saloon would make one thirsty, and Hank was parched. He pushed open the rusted doors with a huff, cursing the sand that had packed in tight to the hinges, causing them to stick. Hank walked in and scanned the room. A few bodies sat littered around the tables, enjoying their drinks. One particularly ugly ghoul sat next to the doors, his thin trunk withered with age. He slurped loudly on his drink and glared at Hank as he crossed the room. His boots hitting the floor with every step drew the attention of all the patrons one at a time. He came to a stop at the bar and sat next to a Thill hat absorbed in his drinks. His flat, disc-hatted head tipped down and tendrils swirled around the glass. The robotic bartender turned to face Hank, and his speech box buzzed as he started to speak. "What will the organic life form have today?" Query finished. Gen 1 bar droids, manufactured with the sole purpose of mixing drinks and collecting credits from drunk patrons who were more than a little willing to pay extra for their 5th refill. Their end-of-statement tone had always weirded him out. "A sunspot double," Hank said, placing his hat on the bar counter next to him. His hat had been finely tailored for him by an old hound rat on Draxon for helping him with a small infestation problem in dust vapors. He shot a look at the Thill hat next to him, who was still more than preoccupied by his drinks. They had the advantage of drinking several glasses at once, given that their face tendrils all acted as independent sponges for their drinks. The barbot, as people called them, rolled up to Hank, glass in hand. "1 sunspot double for the organic life form, sir." It placed the glass on the counter and slid it across to him. Sunspot double, Hank's favorite non-human drink. If you weren't ready for its kick, then boy did you have something coming. He held it up in a cheers to the barbot and then tipped it back, throwing his head with it. The intense burning inched its way down his throat. Hank bucked his head up straight as it hit his stomach. He let out a satisfied sigh as it all came to a rest. A stuck hinge moving quickly open caught his attention from behind. Without looking back, Hank reached out and pulled his hat back onto his head. This was his favorite part of the job. The meant-to-be unexpected but always expected ambush. Several pairs of footsteps came up behind him. He counted them. 2, no. 4, no. He listened closely. Just 3, but one of them was a 3-legged Gerd from Gerdania. Hank casually brushed his knee. Click of a safety going off. They all played out in 2 seconds. And pushed off the bar with his right hand, back into the bird. At the same time, pulling his revolver free with his left hand. Following his motions from the shove, he spun around to face his assailant. The bird's ugly face
Sorry, it's much too sad to be told, but practically everything leads me to legal. The only exception I know is the case when another fights me, fighting vainly the old enemy, and I suddenly turn and see your fat old love's face. I get no kick from champagne. Your alcohol doesn't thrill me out. So tell me why should it be true? I get a kick out of you. Some may go for cocaine. I'm sure that if I took even one sip, it would bother me directly. Take me too. Yeah, I get a kick out of you. I get a kick every time I see you standing there before me. I get a kick, but crashing into you are busy. You are for me. I took a step back and pulled his rifle up. With some guys I get nothing new. I get a kick. I get a kick out of you.
Diving behind the bar. The barbot swiveled to look at him, only to catch a bolt from the rifle in the digital processor. Sparks flew as Hank turned his head, though his hat took most of him instead. The barbot rolled away toward the bar and the assailant shot stopped just long enough for Hank to take his delivery. He jumped out from behind the bar, both guns drawn. The one hand was shooting at him and moved up the bar and was right in his face. The other one was recovering, but still wasn't getting up from under the door. Hank reacted fast, dropping the gun and ducking into the counter and grabbing the barrel of the humanoid's gun, and put the blast into the ceiling. At the same time, Hank sent a shot from his right hand into the other humanoid, toppling him to the ground. He had a much harder time recovering from that one. Hank jerked the gun out of the only thing standing. Hank jerked the gun out of the only standing humanoid's hand, yanking him to the ground. Then hopped over the bar again to his friend. First, he spun him around and introduced his face. Then, listening to the gratifying yelp of his voice splattered across the final part of the road. Some teeth stuck around and pulled his face away. The bartender didn't seem to have taken any damage. He hated that bar and watched him, bad enough that the bat had been hit. Before the humanoid could say anything or even react, Hank took the barrel of his gun and shoved it down his throat. The humanoid choked and gagged as it passed down his windpipe. "Hush now, you baby," Hank said, pulling him in close. So close he could see the individual sweat beads rolling down the guy's forehead. He could smell the sweet tears welling up in his eyes. The humanoid gurgled something that lodged behind the barrel of Hank's gun. "Sorry, what was that? You choking on something?" Hank chuckled. Hank ripped him up violently, even closer to his own face. The humanoid sobs started to sneak past the barrel. "Listen close. You're gonna tell me where your stitcher is right now." The humanoid gurgled again as hot tears rolled down his face. Hank ripped the barrel of his gun out, chased by his blood. The humanoid started coughing right before he emptied his guts onto the floor, right onto Hank's boots. Hank sighed and placed his hand on the humanoid's collar. He gripped him tight and jerked him up to his feet again, shoving his gun back into his chin. "Talk!" he shouted. "Please, please don't kill me," he begged. "I swear I don't know where he is. He never met me in his vice." Hank laughed out loud at the humanoid before responding. He opened his mouth to speak when the barbot shot up from behind the counter, neck stack smoking and void of a head. With a pump-action slug thrower in his hands, demanding threat, "Drop your weapons, thugs. I have been programmed to execute lethal justice if you have to." Hank and the humanoid stared at the barbot with its missing head for a long moment. Hank finally drew up his gun and blasted it in the processing core, toppling it to the ground in a smoking heap. "Sorry," he said, peeking his head up over the bar before turning his attention back to the humanoid. "You know, you Stitch, they're always the same. Bad lies." Pointing the gun back at him. The humanoid quivered in his grip as he sobbed again. Poor excuse for a Stitch. Though to be honest, Hank didn't think there were any good excuses for him. Stitch, or if you want to call him by the clever name, Cyborg, jumped successfully behind the smooth, sensual female voice came on in response. "No, Hank, Bounty is dead or alive." Barb, bring your ship around. I'm ready for pickup. He collected a second revolver off the countertop. Big bang and super. Revolver style plasma sling. Old model for this day. Hank had a soft spot for the outside, the patrons of the saloon were watching from above, and heard the ship's engine swooping down. Its motion reflected the light outside. Just outside the perimeter, the ship buckled down. Hank sighed and dragged the the old red starship, seen by the days, the Hank longer, and often referred to her as Boone. The red paint job was chipped and clear, and the spots of the landing gear streaked in the canal. The ship's long, faded body was perfect to meet any kind of party Hank could ever find himself moving before. With 2 steps to go, the small side passenger ramp slipped down, and the door slid open with a push. Small mist cloud, pressurized air, tilted over the top. "Barb, what did I tell you about being careful with you?" he demanded, dropping the body into the dirt. From inside the dark cabin, emerged a medium-sized Barb spoke. "Well, I'm sorry, but I thought made me from Hank's AI Barbara accompanied him to all of He'd come with the ship, and Hank had carefully told him I really, and even discussed it to the lowest sanity. "Yeah, tell me about it," he said, placing his hands on his hips and looking like a Chapter 2. A body being dragged behind someone makes a very distinctive noise. It was the only sound in a broken barrel to accompany the phase between dimensions is tedious to take, but the only way to travel long distances. Long, of course, meaning you die before you reach that close to the as you walk along the block that bridges over apartment buildings, as the number bars emerge with jet smooth waves and zigzag waves. Don't expose yourself to too long. That is the way. Well, Link was trapped on Earth, Earth's braking system over space to the atmosphere was not entirely. He just needed a little help moving. As he felt a trickle of sweat running out of his legs and dragging his sideways while trying to take full breaths and the natural side effect of her persistent running. Hank, her voice called out into his earpiece. He let her along out of sight. Of course my heart rate got up a little. At this point, he had been dragging his body for about an hour. Sticks were always heavier than the rest. 7 minutes in the body weight far more than so if someone looked 150, they could easily be as heavy as 250. That was what was happening here. Say Hank how much fun. Why didn't you tell me before I got out of the ship with him? He flailed his arms around wide. Silence filled the air for an eternity before Bart responded again. To tell you the truth, I just start to see you work harder than you need to sometimes. The calm tone made it sound like a man. When I get back, we're going to do some serious
Fly on the front, that fish on top line. It's about 9. It's time to eat. Pick up back down, great singing in the background. All stars in the back. All night is clear. Back to can't fly. A long time. So up in the night. Perfect place in mind. Nowhere. There. A long time. Not just get stuck. Crazy. I'm crazy for feeling so lonely. I'm crazy. Crazy for feeling so blue. You're me as long as you want to.
There.
I let myself worry.
Small button inside. Click the button. Contraption. Word alive. You took a step back. Walking the steps split down the road and slid to the sides, revealing a ramp going down under the building. Hank smiled a little as he took a step forward. He took his gun in his right hand and placed
so that I can hardly sing.
found
I never seem to find the happiness I see. When we out together, dancing cheek to cheek. It's time. I'm careful of loving through the week. See, like a street. When we out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I love to climb the mountain. There's the highest peak. But it doesn't really matter as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I love to go out fishing. And we run on a creek. But I don't enjoy it as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Now I dance with me. I want my arms about you. My shoutings about you. Really, really, yeah, it's heaven. I'm in heaven. And my heart beats so that I can hardly see. And I seem to find the happiness I see. When we out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Dancing. I'm in heaven. And my heart beats so that I can hardly see. And I seem to find the happiness I see. When we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Yeah, I'm in heaven. And the cares that come around me through the week seem to vanish like the embers off the street. When we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I love to climb mountains and to reach the high sea. But it doesn't really have as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I love to go out fishing in a river or a creek. But I don't enjoy it half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Come on, dance with me. I want all about you. The charm about you will carry me to heaven. I'm in heaven. And my heart beats so that I can hardly see. And I seem to find the happiness I see. When we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Dance with me. I want all about you. The charm about you will
took in a sight. In the center of the room lay a crude metal surgical table. Lining the walls were counters and cupboards with clear fronts. Some powered-down medical equipment had been left standing by the table in the middle. Anything and everything that could lead to Hank to the Stitcher was gone. The only signs of use in this room were the multiple colors of dried alien blood on the table and an empty test tube on one of the counters. "Blast it all!" Hank shouted, kicking the table over. The loud clanging as it toppled the equipment next to it filled the room. "Hank, are you okay?" Barb's alarmed voice came through his ear. "He's not here, Barb," he shouted back. "Why are you surprised?" Barb queried back at him. Hank placed a hand to his temple to rub at the forming migraine. This was his story. Every time he got close to a breakthrough, the Stitcher slipped right through his fingers. He'd been on the tail of a particular Stitcher for 4 months now. The bounty on these last 3 stitched was his ticket to finding him because he had a location. But now it was back to square one for him. The hunt for the Stitcher would begin again. The payout for bringing in one alive was enough to set you up for life. "Barb, get the ship ready. I'm coming back and we're getting out of here." Hank turned and stormed out of the room, back down the hall. He got up on the surface and made a long walk back to the edge of the city. On the way, he passed the same playground still sitting in the silent abandonment as before. As he drew level with the body of the Stitched, he aimed an angry kick at what was left of the cranium, sending blood and chunks of brain matter over the sidewalk as he did. Once back to the ship, Barb lowered the ramp and let him in. He clambered up to the captain's chair and plopped himself down, removing his air purification mask and tossing it to the side. He pushed the start button, and the ship rattled to life. With a hiccup and a hitch, it rolled up into the air, pushing up debris and dust under it. Beauty roared out of the atmosphere, leaving the dead world behind. Hank set Beauty to drift for a while around the dead sun. The blue glow of the embers beneath the flames set a soft tone in the cockpit for Hank to stare at. The ship intercom buzzed, and a flashing red light flicked on the console. Hank reached out and flipped the switch to open the channel. "Nebula," the raspy voice on the other end called out. "Hey, Pigbelly, what's the news?" Hank asked, kicking his feet up on the console. "What's the news? You're 3 days late on your contract and the client is getting impatient." Pigbelly was Hank's contact with the clients in the glam. The rich snobs there would never be caught dead talking directly to a stitch hunter like Hank, so most of them used third-party informants like Pigbelly. "So I'm a couple days late," Hank protested. "3, Pigbelly grumbled. Okay, 3. But I'm uploading the scans right now," Hank said, going to work on the console. He punched in the chip's code he'd scanned at the saloon, uploading them to a database. Pigbelly groaned on the other end of the communicator. "Hold on, they're coming through. Let me look at them." Pigbelly grumbled to himself on the other end as Hank could hear him pressing buttons. "All right, the funds are being uploaded to your account, Nebula. 600 official credits." "Thanks, Pigbelly," Hank muttered as he watched the funds roll over into his account. He turned to press the button to end the conversation when Pigbelly spoke up again. "Hold on, Nebula. I've got one more thing for you." "What?" He leaned toward the console. "Got another job for you." "Already?" Hank asked, surprised. Usually new jobs didn't come around for a few days. "Don't get too excited. It's not what you're used to," Pigbelly gruffed at him. "Do tell." "Don't got the details with me, Nebula, but the contractor wants to meet with you. Asked for you by name, actually." "Hold on. The contractor wants to meet with me in person?" This was a first for Hank. Contractors were straight from the glam, the rich snobs that hated stitched hunters as people. Luckily, they hated Stitched more. Otherwise, Hank would be out of a job, or worse, dead. "Yeah, she's got a special job for you and wanted to offer it to you in person. Wouldn't tell me anything about it." "All right, where?" Hank asked. "Sending you the location now. I'll meet you there in 3 days to get you ready," Pigbelly breathed. "Meet me there?" Hank asked. Pigbelly laughed at his question. "He's from the glam. I've still got to make you presentable to my client." He closed the channel, laughing the whole time. Get him ready? Hank wasn't sure he liked the sound of that. Regardless, the location was left flashing on his console for him to accept. Hank had a bad feeling about it, but he hit accept. Chapter 3. Barb floated into the cabin silently and managed to catch Hank sleeping in his seat again. His uneven snoring filled the room, accompanied by the soft moan of the engines between breaths. Barb drifted up next to his head slowly. She took medical scans of his body the whole way, checking his heart rate and blood levels just because she could. She inched up to the side of his face covered by his hat. She noticed his feet perched up on the console in front of him. Barb hated it when he put his feet up there, when she was interfaced with the ship. She could all but feel his heavy boots slap the metal every time. "Nebula!" Barb shouted against his ear. Hank jerked upright in his seat, hat flying off his face. He let out a spew of profanity as he jerked his head around to look at the floating ball next to him. Barb rushed backward away from him so she wasn't in danger of catching a stray fist to her outer plating. "Barb!" Hank growled as he rose to his feet. "How many times have I told you not to do that?" he grimaced. "Keep your dirty feet off the console," Barb droned back at him. Hank fumed for a moment with no comeback in mind. He narrowed his gaze at her, wondering if he should just power her down for a while. It would get him some peace and quiet. Oh, also, Barb added, we'll be at the Broadhead station in a few minutes, so get ready to exit phase. Thanks, Barb, Hank breathed, sitting back in his seat. He reached down and plucked his hat off the floor and placed it back on his head. Barb drifted over to her interface to the left of the cabin, a small half-dome shaped receiver that fit the lower half of her ball-shaped body perfectly. The interface hummed to life, and Barb's central eye went out. On the console in front of Hank, a new red light flickered to life, followed by several more strewn about the console controls. Ship interface complete, Barb's smooth voice said over the speakers. Hank, buckle in. All right, Mother, Hank mocked, pulling the strap over his shoulder. The phase shield over the cockpit's viewport retracted back into the standby position. The swirling bright colors of the phase were blinding. Hank had to cover his eyes momentarily as they adjusted. The swirls of the phase had a trance-inducing property to them. They said that if you stared at it for too long, you'd go mad. So most all standardized ships come with shielding that close down over all viewports on the ships to protect their occupants. In front of Hank, the view shifted from that of swirls to solid black space. Bright stars dotted the backdrop. Straight ahead, a massive space station came into view, resting above an expansive asteroid belt. Broadhead Station was a port for traders and smugglers alike, a dirty place that rested on the edge of uncontrolled space, which meant that no government dictated the going-ons inside. Heavy space traffic swirled around the gargantuan station. It got its name from its design, looking like an upside-down broadhead from an outdated technology called a bow and arrow. Hank took manual control of Beauty as they drew near to the traffic. Barb, prep the docking comm so we can get inside, Hank commanded. Okay, she responded. Hank maneuvered Beauty through the traffic of freighters and passenger ships as he approached the station docking area. Hundreds, if not thousands, of docking bays were scattered around the central ring of the body of the station, each one with a constant flow of traffic. A voice came over the ship's communication channel. Craft V2387. This is your docking control officer 9. Please transmit your docking codes now, the voice droned. Hank plucked away at the controls for a moment before he responded. Coming right up. A long silence fell over the cockpit as the docking officer received the transmission. Hank had been to Broadhead Station more than a few times and always kept up-to-date landing codes in his ship. On a few visits, he'd managed to win himself some good credits playing a hand or two of stacks, the local favorite for gambling life forms. On one particular occasion, Hank had a pretty hairy win against a slimy finback that ended in a bar fight. The docking officer's voice came back over the comm. Head for the docking bay 12. Thank you, my friend, Hank grunted. He pushed Beauty forward, using the new flight path to find bay 12. He approached the bay in pace with the landing lights, reaching out into open space. The small orange glowing bulbs helped twist the gravity of ships to pull them into the bay easier. Once Hank lined Beauty up with the first two, he let the rest of them guide him in slowly. The traffic around him zoomed by in blurs of light and metal. The bay grew around his ship, filling the cockpit with white light from overhead. A small shudder escaped from Beauty's landing gear as she touched down in the bay. Hank shook in his seat on impact and looked over at Barb. Smooth as butter. He grinned at Barb as she plucked herself up from the interface. If you say so, she mocked as she floated around the room. Hank could see the pit crew emerge from one of the doors to the far right of the hangar. The nice thing about Broadhead Station was that you got a free brush over and refuel on touchdown. Hank walked out of the cabin and down the short rectangular corridor to the small cargo door. It jerked open with a loud hiss, and Hank stepped out onto the ramp. The harsh smell of Beauty's engine fumes hit him in the face when he stepped down, and a suppressed cough escaped his mouth. A group of humanoid figures started brushing past Hank in full green jumpsuits and thick, closed-faced helmets. On the last one brushing him, Hank grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him around. "Hey, listen! You gotta be gentle with Beauty now, you hear? She needs a delicate touch." The pit officer stared at him with an empty-faced helmet, not saying anything for a long moment. Finally, a grunt left his helmet. Then he ran off to rejoin the others. Hank watched him start scanning over the ship with a small handheld device. Hank raised his hand to the small, hidden earpiece he had and whispered, "Barb, keep the doors locked and be ready for a quick takeoff." "Hank, you say that every time we land here," Barb's voice said back. "We have never once left here in a hurry." "Barb," Hank huffed. Barb let out a long, exaggerated sigh before responding, "I'll have the ship ready to depart at a moment's notice." Hank smiled to himself, satisfied that he was ready for anything. He turned and walked farther to the station. The solid-colored gray corridors directly attached to the docking bay were a bad representation of the station as a whole. A few turns down the halls brought Hank to the doors leading to the main streets of the station. They slid open with a creak, revealing the full glory of Broadhead Station. The streets were packed tightly with alien life hustling around to their various destinations. Hundreds of dirty-looking shops lined the sides of the streets. Above Hank's head, every wall space was cramming tight with fluorescent signs for the various shops and food stands. A thick smog filled the air above the structures, getting caught in the high-domed roof over the hub's streets. Hank could see the faint glow of the overhead offices and hotels that looked down at the rust-stained walkways. A small green alien with large black eyes bumped into Hank's shins. The life form snapped its head up to look him in the eyes and jabbered something in its native tongue. It sounded like a combination of clicking and humming before the alien scurried off into the crowd as Hank watched. He hated coming to Broadhead because it was crammed full with one of the things Hank thoroughly hated: crowds. He felt cramped up while at the same time also exposed, and most people had a hard time spotting threats in large crowds unless you knew what to look for. Hank pushed his way through the streets, passing vendors and beggars alike. There were at least one life form with a tin drinking mug on every corner. One or two credits rattling inside. On more than one occasion, Hank had to shake one that had decided he had looked loaded enough to share off his pant leg. As he turned the corner around the noodle shop, another beggar decided to latch onto him. The purple life form reached out with a three-fingered hand and clutched his pant leg. "Please, sir, credits?" the life form croaked between swollen, cracked lips. Hank jerked his leg, but the life form clung tighter as a result. Hank snapped his head down and looked at the alien, wrapped in a dingy brown cloth that barely passed for a blanket. "Look here, you little worthless galactic trash. Let go of my leg before I send a ball of burning hot plasma through your cranial housing." Hank growled in a whisper at the alien, flipping his coat back to reveal his revolver. The alien's tiny red eyes went wide in horror, and it let out a shriek. Its hands recoiled back to its body, and it hid its face from Hank. "Please don't," he squeaked in a feeble voice. Hank smirked and flipped his coat back in place, then walked away. The ambient noise of the street swallowed up the alien's shriek. Not that anyone would care if Hank had offered a beggar on the Broadhead. There would be 2 new ones in its place the next day. Once away from the main shopping area, Hank made his way to the upper district without incident. A short trip up a few ramps placed him on the second level that compromised the upper district. Hank felt better up here because it wasn't as crowded as below. The higher class of the level was barely noticeable between the life forms roaming here and below, but it was considerably less busy. Hank saw more humans here, which he liked. It wasn't that he hated aliens, he just liked humans more. Even so, for every human he could count at least 5 aliens. Hank grunted to himself as he stared towards the entertainment corner of the upper district. The neon signs were less jam-packed in the overhead spaces of the streets here. Hank felt like he could breathe better because of it, at least for a short while, because he knew an empty space would soon be replaced by cramped corners and even bigger signs in the entertainment district. Pigbelly had a taste for the more erotic side of entertainment. That meant that he'd usually find him stuffing his gullet in a flesh club of some sort. Hank walked between the busy bodies around him, scanning them for threats the whole time. Aliens and humans alike moved about, giving no mind to Hank. A tall, thin alien that looked like a Q-tip with red skin walked past him, catching his attention. Hank watched it pass by him, its long, flowing robes brushing the floor as it did. In his distraction, he bumped into another figure in front of him. Hank reeled back, pushing off the fat body. He looked up and saw a massive, four-legged fat Zinc looking down at him. Zinc were a massive creature from a planet that Hank couldn't remember the name of in the moment. They were ugly, though. One big eye in their face with a small round mouth below it. Their face looked like really confused semicolon, in all honesty. Hank gave a false, apologetic look to the alien. "Sorry, pal." The alien belted out a note in its language, which Hank did not know a single word of. He threw up his hands to the alien and stepped back as the alien thrust one of its appendages at him angrily. His tight-fitting suit flexed as it flailed around about at him. Hank brushed past him and moved away towards his destination again to avoid a fight. The rest of the life forms on the path pretended nothing had even happened. Hank wasn't kidding when he decided that he could off a beggar and they wouldn't even be missed. Violence was a normal thing at Broadhead Station. Murder was barely considered a crime here, in fact. Price you pay for living on the edge of the controlled space like that. At the end of that, though, Hank rounded a corner in the pathway and came to face the club. The neon hologram above the door was huge. In a rainbow of colors, it depicted a moving image of a female humanoid dancing on a pole seductively. Hank hated the entire appearance of flesh clubs. Nothing in his eyes showed the filth of the universe, quite like throwing credits at humanoids to make them strip on a stage for others to enjoy. Too bad for him that Pigbelly loved them. In fact, he practically lived in them. The sign above the door read in standard, "The Black Hole." The door was busted open, and a screaming life form was thrown out onto the street. The thing hit the ground in front of Hank, splashing vapor drippings. The thing hit the ground in front of Hank, splashing vapor drippings on his boots. Hank grunted in disgusted look at the light form. A human male jerked up and turned toward the door to begin shouting at the bouncer that had thrown him out. Hank followed his line of sight. A large gird blocked the doorway. The human pounded into him, hitting his chest with a crack. The gird didn't budge, but instead reeled back and slammed his hulking fist into the human's jaw. A loud crack filled the air, and the human was thrown around in a spin toward Hank again. He sidestepped the flying body as it passed by. The human hit the ground hard, his blood filling the vapor drippings and turned them red. He was clearly dead. The gird turned toward Hank and grunted at him. Hank returned the look with a nervous smile and wave as he stepped toward him. Chapter 4. The pulsating music in the club rattled Hank's body like a cheap washer on the spin cycle. Strobing lights made his eyes dilate violently. Between flashes, he could see the outlines of female dancers doing what they did best on the stages. Their poles all glowed a different faint color from one another, but they all moved to the rhythm of the music, their bodies gyrating and rolling around the stages. Hank pressed through the crowds of life forms, clamoring for better views. The smell of sweat and hormones filled the air as he pressed through to the back. Once he got to the other side, he found himself in a small VIP area of private booths. Each booth was round in shape, with a table in the middle and bench circling it. A small light in the center of the table illuminated the occupants enough for them to see their drinks. "Nebula?" a rough voice yelled from Hank's left. He looked over and saw his affiliate, a fat, leathery Shieldra, sitting in the booth next to him. Shieldra were large, walking, snapping turtles with 3-fingered hands tipped with claws. Their leathery necks could extend out 3 times their resting lengths. Powerful, snapping jaws defined a large part of their faces. In Pigbelly's case, his mouth was puffed out with his weight. He wasn't called Pigbelly for nothing. His gut hung out almost farther than his neck could, barely covered by his previously white stained shirt. "Hey, Pigbelly," Hank waved as he walked up to the table. Pigbelly gestured off his wave and pointed to the open seat across from him. Hank sat down, placing his hat on the table. Through the clear tabletop, he could see Pigbelly's clawed feet resting stretched out on the end of his fat legs under the table. "No time for pleasantries, Nebula," Pigbelly grunted. "We've got a big job on our hands this time." "A big job?" Hank asked. Pigbelly gulped down the rest of his drink and slammed the empty glass onto the table. "Yes, big." "How big?" "Big enough to set you and me up for life." Pigbelly placed his hands on the table and leaned in. "Even with the modest charge of 35% for getting you the contracts, I'll be set for life." "Hey, it was 30% last month," Hank exclaimed, leaning in to meet Pigbelly's gaze. In the low light, Pigbelly's small and normally black eyes reflected the colors of the strobes behind him, making him look more animalistic. "I upped it. What are you gonna do about it? Replace me?" Pigbelly chuckled, leaning back in his seat. Hank let out a frustrated sigh as he too leaned back. All right. So what are we waiting for then? Let's go get the information so I can find out just how much this job pays." Pigbelly gestured for someone behind him in the dark. Hank saw 2 large figures walk up and stop behind him. Pigbelly stood up, gesturing for Hank to follow. The 2 figures escorted him and Pigbelly farther into the bar, where they came to a closed door, unmarked, leaving no indication as to where it led. Hank and Pigbelly stepped inside as the shadowed escorts opened it. A soft click indicated the door shutting behind them. The room was pitch black and silent. A long, drawn-out moment passed before Hank picked up on Pigbelly's labored breathing. "So this is the part where one of us makes a move on the other?" Hank scoffed in the dark. With an angered grunt, Pigbelly told him off. "Shut up, Nebula. We're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Before Pigbelly could respond, the room was filled with a sharp blue light. Hank and Pigbelly shielded their eyes until they could adjust to the intrusive glare. Through watering eyes, Hank pinned down its origin to a small fisheye lens protruding out of the ceiling. In the light, Hank noticed the simplicity of the room. No detail to the 4 walls, no furniture, nothing. The only objects to break the smooth, bare pattern were the door behind them and the lens in the ceiling. A holographic image formed in the center of the room in front of Hank. He was face to face with a high-backed, command-like chair. Hank was surprised that it was to size, as if someone was sitting in the room with them. A rough nudge from his right got his attention. He snapped his head around to look at the Pigbelly's reacting to his arm. "Step to your right," he breathed, gesturing down at Hank's feet. Hank looked down and spotted the barely noticeable ring set in the floor, a hollow scanner used for projecting the user to the receiving party on the other end. In this instance, Hank knew it would send his image back to whoever it was sitting in that seat. This meant that the individual in the chair would only be able to see Hank on his end. Hank pulled his left leg into the ring. Sir Fendra, Pigbelly huffed. I have my business partner, Hank Nebula, here as I told you I would. The chair spun around slowly to face them. Sitting in the seat was a man dressed in what looked like a polished fleet captain's uniform. His shoulders were decorated with the chiseled faces of lions staring off stoically at nothing. Finely placed medals adorned his chest. Hank looked up at his face to inspect the man himself. It was grizzled and sharp, edged with a neatly trimmed short beard. Matching short hair followed a hard, straight line across his forehead. Hank could tell he was a military man before he even said a word. The man looked Hank and Pigbelly over with a faint expression of disgust. This is the famed Stitch Hunter? He remarked in rough, commanding tone. Yes, he is, Pigbelly muttered. I was expecting more, he said, staring at Hank as his blue image crackled. Sorry to disappoint. I wasn't aware this was a beauty pageant. But as it's me you asked for, what can I hunt for you, Hank pressed. All business it is, then, he said, standing from his seat. I am Sir Fendra. As your handler failed to introduce me, he commented, gesturing to where he assumed Pigbelly would be standing. Hank noticed as he spoke just how tall he was. Sir Fendra stood almost a head over him, though Hank considered that, even though the hologram was life-size, he couldn't be sure this was Fendra's exact height. The thought he made Hank feel a little better, and he certainly would cut out Pigbelly's extra 5% for the handler moniker, too. The complete ass. Well, my handler mentioned you had a job for me. I do, Sir Fendra said. Not long ago, my daughter ran away, and I would like you to bring her back for me. Hold it right there, big guy, Hank interrupted. You've got the wrong guy for the job. Oh? Sir Fendra raised an eyebrow. I kill Stitched. That's what I'm good at. Not babysitting some kid while I bring her back to her daddy. I think your skills for tracking people down are of great use to me in this situation, Fendra said, placing his hands behind his back. I also think the offer I have for you in return will convince you. Is that so? Hank perked his eyebrows. I'm prepared to offer you 5 million credits, Sir Fendra declared, for her safe return. Hank choked on his next sentence before he could let it fly out of his mouth. 5 million would be enough to retire on, even if you cut out a third of it to pay a loser like Pigbelly. Rebuild beauty, and then have more than he would know what to do with in leftovers. Hank took a moment to think about his next words carefully. He swallowed twice, working to make sure his voice wouldn't sound too much like a broken, squeaky toy. I'll take the job. Sir Fendra smiled slightly to himself. Maybe I was wrong about you, Nebula. What's that supposed to mean? Hank asked. I have a contact in the gas farms in Upfra, Sir Fendra said, ignoring his question. I have reason to believe that he has information on my daughter's location. I want you to go there and find out what he knows. Who's the contact? Hank asked. He's a hound rat named Gulp. He worked in the processors on the lower levels. You'll know him by his missing left hand and a scar on his face, Sir Fendra answered as he sat back down in his seat. He pressed a button on his armrest. I'm sending more information about him to your handler, and he can pass it to you. Any last details I should know? Hank pressed. Yes, Sir Fendra responded. My daughter's name is Lux Fendra. She is 22 years old. It is of great importance to me that you bring her back unharmed and in a timely manner. Hank thought it weird that he'd include such an obvious last detail. He decided not to address it, though, and simply turned to walk out of the room. He glanced over his shoulder at Pigbelly. Forward the info to Beauty. I'm going to take off. Pigbelly nodded his head and grunted as Hank opened the door and walked out. Hank brushed past the two shadowy figures that stood still outside the room. He walked through the club, trying to keep the strobing lights and loud pulsing music out of his head. The crowd seemed thicker on his way out than on his way in. They were gathered around the stages, watching a blue-skinned humanoid female with tendrils on her head. He brushed past a couple of bodies by the door and stepped out as the crowd started cheering loudly. Hank took a deep breath as the door clicked shut behind him. The stale air of Broadhead Station hurt Hank's lungs a little bit, but it was better than the stuffy air of the Flesh Club. Hank looked around at the busy street. The filth of the station really stood out in the upper levels due to the slightly lower foot traffic on any given time. Hank could see the piles of trash scattered along the sides of the road. He sighed softly, as he couldn't help but wonder, how was he going to handle this job? Well, that was the first 4 chapters, and while I don't think audiobooks are going to be a future career for me, this was fun. Thanks to anyone who actually sat through this. Goodbye for now.